We are conditioned from childhood to believe that misunderstanding is an emergency, that silence is a confession of guilt, and that every accusation demands an immediate, meticulous defense. People tell us that if we care about a relationship, we must fight for our narrative, untangle every twisted word, and prove our intentions with microscopic precision. We spend hours crafting long paragraphs, rehearsing explanations in front of the mirror, and exhausting our mental bandwidth just to make someone else see the world through our eyes. We treat every dropped anchor of doubt as a call to dive into the deep end and salvage our reputation. But there comes a quiet, desolate moment in human dynamics when this entire compulsion suddenly evaporates, leaving behind a cold, unbothered vacuum. The most exhausting part of declining relationships isn't the fighting or the betrayal. It is the moment you realize you no longer care enough to hand over the keys to your truth. Consider the anatomy of a typical argument long past its expiration date. You are sitting across from someone whose opinion used to dictate the weather in your mind. They cross their arms, lean back with that familiar look of smug self-righteousness, and launch into a well-rehearsed monologue of grievances, twisting your past actions into malicious intent. In the past, your heart would spike. Your palms would sweat. You would interrupt, frantically piecing together timelines, digging up old chat logs, and pleading for a shred of basic understanding. You wanted them to know you weren't the villain they were painting. But today, none of that biological panic arrives. Instead, you just stare at them. You watch their mouth move, noticing the petty twitch of their lips, and a profound, bone-deep boredom washes over you. You realize that explaining yourself to someone who is deeply committed to misunderstanding you is like trying to explain calculus to a brick wall. It consumes your energy, cheapens your dignity, and yields zero dividends. You look at the person shouting across the table, and instead of feeling the urge to clarify, you feel a sudden, overwhelming urge to check your watch. You ask yourself a terrifyingly liberating question: why am I sweating to defend myself in front of a judge who has already rigged the jury? The illusion we cling to is that silence hurts relationships, but the bitter truth is that over-explaining kills them first. When you explain yourself, you implicitly grant the other person the authority to validate your reality. You give them veto power over your character. You act as though their approval is a currency you still desperately need to survive. But the moment emotional detachment sets in, that currency becomes worthless overnight. You stop viewing them as a partner or a friend whose bond is worth preserving, and you start viewing them as an irrelevant spectator shouting into an empty room. You look at their accusations and you simply shrug. Let them think what they want. Let them paint you as cold, distant, or entirely at fault. Their narrative requires your participation to stay alive, and the moment you refuse to play ball, their entire performance collapses into awkward silence. Most people mistake this sudden reluctance to explain for apathy or arrogance or emotional numbness. They think you've grown heartless because you no longer throw tantrums or write defensive essays in response to their provocation. But they fail to recognize that silence is rarely born out of cruelty. It is born out of utter exhaustion and a depleted emotional bank account. You don't stop explaining because you think you're better than them. You stop because you finally value your own peace more than their validation. You understand that your energy is a finite, sacred resource, and spending it on someone who uses your words as ammunition is the ultimate form of self-sabotage. Every time you open your mouth to defend your innocence to a closed mind, you are feeding a fire that only wants to consume you. When you starve that fire of your justifications, it flickers out, leaving you standing in the cold light of reality, completely free from the burden of their judgment. Think about the sheer weight of the mental gymnastics you used to perform. You had to anticipate their triggers, sanitize your tone, edit your thoughts, and package your boundaries into polite, palatable boxes so they wouldn't take offense. You were walking on eggshells in a minefield of fragile egos. And for what? To be misunderstood anyway? To have your sincerity weaponized against you? The turning point always arrives quietly. There is no dramatic door slamming or cinematic monologue. It happens while you are washing dishes or staring out a rainy window, and you suddenly realize that you simply do not care if they hate you. Their opinion of you has been demoted from a life-altering crisis to background noise. You realize that a clean conscience doesn't require a public notary. You know who you are, what you meant, and what you did. If they choose to misinterpret your silence as guilt, that is their burden to carry, not yours to untangle. This is the hidden liberation of the weary soul. We spend decades running after people, screaming, "Wait, you got it all wrong. Let me explain," until our lungs burn and our voices turn hoarse. We act like desperate defense attorneys in a courtroom where the verdict was written before we even walked through the door. But true maturity is learning to walk out of that courtroom entirely. You leave them sitting there with their accusations, their rehearsed speeches, and their empty outrage. You don't slam the door, you just gently close it, knowing you will never return to that conversation. The heavy lifting of human connection stops the moment you stop needing to be understood by everyone. You realize that your peace is too expensive to spend on cheap drama, and your words are too valuable to waste on deaf ears. Let them misunderstand. Let them build their little castles of resentment in their heads. You are too busy living your life to bother paying rent in their delusions. When the desire to explain dies, your freedom truly begins. You used to spend hours fighting to be understood. Now you just watch them misunderstand and smile.